What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more acid-techno, as well as a very vocal Luca. Yes, I know, are you coming up? She's thinking about it. But we're going to listen to a tune from an amazing release, a true four-tracker, meaning all four tracks on this are fantastic, and perhaps it's not surprising for those who know how much I like the Geezer's work. Oh, and by the way, yes, I have 2 copies of this. All 4 of the tunes are duo collaborations with the Geezer as one of the members or one of the producers, including a track by Chris Liberator and the Geezer called Surprise, which is excellent and which I almost reacted to instead of this one, and which surely I'll react to very soon. Have you decided what you're going to do? You going to sit down? I think she might. But yes, we're actually going to listen to a tune by DVS and the Geezer. DVS, I don't know much about him other than he's from Australia, and he's one of the techno militia, like not spelled as it typically is, but like M-U-L-I-S-H-A, I believe. But yes, techno militia, which put out a couple records at the very least. I don't know if they did more than 2, but I have 2 of them, the first couple. And I think most of the techno militia guys, if not all of them, are from the Melbourne scene. So yes, this is by the one and only legendary Geezer, Guy McGaffer, and DVS, who, as I said, is from Melbourne in Australia, and one of a handful of folks who make acid techno down there. In any case, the tune is called They've Got You by the Balls, which is a direct quote from the unfortunately late, but also legendary George Carlin, a comedian who mixed incisive social, political, and economic commentary with a, let's say, caustic style. I mean, he's not like an insult comic or a comic who is, controversial and provocative for the sake of being so, like a, Sam Kinison or something, but he absolutely would incorporate profanity and harsh or, in many cases, entirely reasonable, sharp critiques of certain aspects of society, politics, and so on. And that is the essence of the quote here. And long story short, he talks about how political figures, especially, let's say, on the right end of the spectrum, are keen to enact policies that pay lower-end workers as little as possible, guarantee them no benefits, and essentially lock them into their socioeconomic state with no chance of upward mobility, and then at the end of the day they try to sunset or phase out social safety net programs like here in the US Social Security, which you pay into while you're working, and the idea is you're building a retirement fund so that when you retire, all that money you've put into the system can then be given to you in yearly payouts as you are no longer working in your twilight years. But again, certain political figures on the right end of the spectrum, which here in the US means you're talking the Republican Party, they've often talked about, well, that's just an entitlement and we want to get rid of that, and we don't want, people to be able to get the benefits that they work their entire life for. And this sample, which I don't know what stand-up bit this comes from Carlin. I do know some of Carlin's famous stand-up bits, but this is not one that I knew prior to hearing this record. But again, if you've ever heard George Carlin's voice, you immediately recognize it. And the moment the first word started from him on this record or on this track, I was like, oh wait, this is a Carlin bit? Okay. So yeah, let's give it a listen. This is DVS and the Geezer. The track is They Got You by the Balls, and it's from a 2015 Wah Wah record. As people will know, I'm hugely fond of Wah Wah, probably my favorite of all the Stay Up Forever sublabels. And yes, it's on, what's the number? Wah Wah, is it 28? Yeah, it's Wah Wah 28. DVS and the Geezer, They Got You by the Balls.
Obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back.
Very much muckraking acid-techno, which I've told the story endlessly, so I won't belabor the point here, but yeah, part of what drew me to acid-techno in the mid to late 90s when I discovered it and really got into it was because it became clear that it was the punk rock of the rave, like, techno world, both in terms of its sonic character. It was wicked, it was in your face, it was very edgy sounding, but also in terms of the samples and the themes of the track names, and as I eventually learned, a lot of the artists had histories in punk rock. A lot of the labels were built as these collectives. You know, they weren't part of these major, like, corporate distribution chains. They were very DIY and independent labels. So, yeah, that is, as I said, what drew me to acid-techno. And in this case, like, 20 years after that, and now, like, 30 years after I first got into acid-techno, that is still very much the essence of the acid-techno scene that I follow and in my own small way am a part of. So, yeah, once again, this is a muckraking tune. Shout out to George Carlin, some very incisive and insightful lines, and I enjoy his turn of phrase. He, like, once he gets going, you could tell he was one of those comedians, because again, this is all in the context of like stand-up comedy. He makes people laugh, but he's often talking, or he often talked about themes and ideas that were, dissident and were in a mind of being an activist in your life and not just passively accepting the shittier jobs, the lower pay, the end of overtime, the lack of benefits, and the snatching away of your retirement money. So, yeah, shout out to an RIP to George Carlin. And it's just a great tune. I talked in this same batch when I did a reaction to Acid Chochi's Those Were the Days, that the acid in that tune was very lathered and rich, and there was a texture to it. Well, one of Geezer's hallmarks, going back all the way to the 90s, but maybe especially in his third phase, which this is my own thing, but when I hear and listen to Geezer's work under a few different names, but mostly under the Geezer moniker, there's sort of like 3 chapters of that to me. There's the mid to late 90s, very early 2000s stylings. Then for the next several years in the mid 2000s, he kind of went into a different style, which I think is best articulated by his tracks on Skankadelic and Blipped. And then by the time you get to the early 2010s, he sort of went into this mode that more or less I think he's still in now, over a decade later. And this is, I would say, like that third style, the current era of his productions. But in his whole career, and especially in this third era, he makes these acid lines that are very layered and dense, and they do have a very rich texture to them. So even if there's like a lead acid line, like snarling or squiggling or waving over the top, there tends to be this lower end, like acid bass line or acid texture at the bottom of the track that is just unmistakably one of his calling cards, and it's very much the case here. There is also some acid work which rises up. I do, in particular, like that. It's almost like a computer bird sound, like a rhythmic bird sound that you might hear, but done in a way that makes it sound very digital and computerish. And that element is very prominent. It's sort of, like offset against the kick drum, so it has what I sometimes call like a creaking sound or character. Anytime there's a rhythmic synth that's like offset against the kick drum, it's almost like with each kick drum, it's making the whole like infrastructure of the track like creak or, shake a little bit. So yeah, that element I think does a really important job in the tune. In any case, it's a masterpiece. Shout out to both Geezer and to DVS. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you for the next one. Peace.